Okay?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. So let's start. Hello, everyone. I am Daniela Osadsky-Stern, and thank you all very much for being with us today for another event of the Holocaust Studies program at Western Galilee College, headed by Dr. Boaz Cohen. We are recording this event and we will upload it to our website, and please keep your microphones on mute. We are delighted to welcome today Professor Deborah Lipstadt, a professor of modern Jewish history and Holocaust studies at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, where she created the Institute for Jewish Studies and was its first director. Professor Lipstadt was a historical consultant to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and helped design the section of the museum dedicated to the American response to the Holocaust. She was appointed by President Clinton to the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. Professor Lipstadt has been called upon by members of the United States Congress to consult on political responses to Holocaust denial. From 1996 through 1999, she served as a member of the U.S. State Department Advisory Committee on Religious Freedom Abroad. In 2016, the movie Denial came out based on her book, History on Trial, My Day in Court with David Irving. This book is a story of a reliable trial in London against Irving, who sued her for calling him a Holocaust denier and right-wing extremist. The book won the 2006 National Jewish Book Award. In 2019, Professor Lipstadt, can everyone mute themselves, please? In 2019, Professor Lipstadt published her book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, which was also, by the way, translated into Hebrew. She has received numerous teaching and book awards. And today, Professor Lipstadt will discuss the topic of Holocaust denial. Anti-Semitism, by another name, is still anti-Semitism. She will converse with Dr. Roni Mikel Arieli from our team, who is a cultural historian interested in the intersections between Holocaust memory, contemporary Jewish history, and human rights. She is currently a Rosa Luxemburg Research Fellow at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. She is working on her research project, Jewish Deportees in Mauritius. She holds a PhD in Jewish history from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And Dr. Mikel Arieli's first authored book, titled Remembering the Holocaust in a Racial State, Holocaust Memory in South Africa from Apartheid to Democracy, is forthcoming next year. Professor Lipstadt, we are honored to have you here with us, and the floor is yours. We are looking forward to a stimulating virtual discussion, followed by questions from the audience. So please write your questions in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniela. And I want to thank you for your kind introduction and to thank Professor Lipstadt for agreeing to have this conversation with me. Last year, I was very privileged to be Phyllis Greenberg Heidemann and Richard Heidemann Fellow at the Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And during that year, Professor Lipstadt served as Ina Levine Invitational Scholar at the Mandel Center. And although we spend more than half of our time in DC from our apartments, we had several very interesting encounters and exchanged. And it was in this framework that I first watched the British-American biographical film Denial, based on Professor Lipstadt's book, History of Trial, My Day in Courts with a Holocaust Denial. And Deborah, with your permission, I would like to open our conversation by watching a short scene from this film, which I think will help us to get into the subject of Holocaust denial.
Roll.
Great.
Everyone, it is my pleasure to introduce the holder of the Dorot Chair in Jewish and Holocaust Studies at Emory University and the author of Denying the Holocaust, The Growing Assault on Truth and Memory, Deborah Lipstadt.
Whatever the reasons that people become deniers, when you look closely, they often have an agenda which they won't admit to. So denial is a pick to undo the lock to open the door to something else. Yes?
Somebody told me you don't debate with people who say the Holocaust didn't happen.
That is correct, like I don't debate with people who say Elvis is alive.
Talking to people you don't agree with, that's democracy, isn't it? It's cowardly not to talk to them.
Are you calling me a coward?
Well,
No, listen, I don't see it that way. You can have opinions about the Holocaust, you can argue about why it happened and how it happened, but what I won't do is meet with anyone who says it didn't happen. Because the Holocaust happened. It happened. And that isn't opinion, that's fact. And I won't debate facts.
In your book, why do you continually denigrate the work of David Irving? He's a scholar. He's discovered all sorts of primary sources no one else knew about.
Well, to be honest, I don't think I do denigrate him. Actually, I don't really think about him that much. I don't think he's worth my time. Yes, sir, gentleman in the back.
Professor Lipstadt, let me reveal something to you, Professor. I am that David Irving about whom you have been so rude. Yes, I am he. And it puzzles me that you think yourself qualified to attack me, given that I have 30 years' experience in the archives. And my books have been published by some of the greatest publishing houses in the world. Viking Press, William Morrow, E.P. Dutton. I have to conclude that the reason you don't engage with people you disagree with is because you can't. And you might learn some facts, Miss Lipstadt, which don't suit your opinions. Well,
Mr. Irving, I will not debate you, not here, not now, not ever. So if you would please
today I've heard you telling lies to students.
In another room at another
time. You want gullible students to believe that there are mounds of documents which prove a Holocaust. You even said that Hitler ordered it. Well, I've got $1,000 in my pocket. Yes, $1,000, and I'm willing to give that $1,000 to anyone who can show me a document that proves that Hitler ordered the killing of the Jews.
Here it is. This is not your Q&A. You can go and speak somewhere else, but not with me.
Who paid for you to write your book?
Who
is it that finances all your expensive trips around the world? You talk about documents. I have a document here. It's an aerial photograph of Auschwitz. Miss Lipstadt not only won't debate, she calls security to stop me from debating. Right, well, I'm going to need you to sit down. If anybody wants, I should be signing my books after the event. My books, they're free. Come and get one.
Deborah, I would like for us to start with this very powerful thing and to ask, what is Holocaust denial and why is it so dangerous?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, Boaz, to your team. Thank you, Roni, for doing this. And it's really impressive to see the people from all over. There are a lot of folks, I think, from London. If that setting looked familiar to you, that was filmed at JW3 when you didn't have to sit 6 feet apart and you could actually go into the building. And by the way, just as background, because I'm sure this will come up, that did happen. That happened at a local college here in Atlanta Community College. Students are older students, many of them part-time, a very diverse audience who knew almost nothing about the Holocaust and witnessed this exchange. And I think Rachel Weisz really nailed how I felt at that time, which was like a deer. When she called me the morning she was filming it and asked me, how did you feel when this happened? And I said, Rachel, I felt like a deer in headlights. And I think she really got that. And I'm willing, if people ask later about it, I can talk more about that. So your question, Roni, what is Holocaust denial? It's a complex question. Because one could say, anybody who denies that 6 million died, but and I know there are many historians on this call, from many of them I have learned a great deal. But the numbers are debatable. Raoul Hilberg has a much lower number. Other people have the work of Patrick Dubois, Father Patrick Dubois, and his excavation suggests maybe a higher number. So the numbers are variable. But I would say it's as follows, taking the broadest kinds of things. And if people want to explore further, we can do that as well. First of all, saying that there was no organized plan to murder European Jewry, European and beyond. I use European just as make it shorter. Of course, it was beyond Europe as well. There was a plan, and it was, I don't know if I said ordered by Hitler, but it certainly came from the highest ranks of the Third Reich. This was, and I stress that. Why do I stress that? And why do I begin with that? Because deniers will say to you, well, people may have died. First of all, they'll use died rather than killed. Or they may even say some people may even have been killed. But they will react against the idea of this having been organized, having been coming centrally from the Third Reich. So that's one of the first things I would say. I would say anybody who, I don't give an exact number, but anyone who says, a far smaller number than the approximate 6 million is already beginning to engage in Holocaust denial. I think anyone who says, and deniers say this, that the Jews made this up in order to get money, in order to get a state of Israel, that's Holocaust denial. And one of the other crucial points that I would say is Holocaust, and there'll be others that will come up, but I don't want to go into too long a discourse on all these points, is the denial of the gas chambers. For deniers, the gas chambers are a pivotal element. Now, I'm not suggesting a hierarchy in the suffering of killing. If Jews were killed in, on the Eastern Front and by the Einsatzgruppen or in shootings, that's you're dead, and you're killed, you're murdered. But the idea of the gas chambers, and one of the reasons why they go to such lengths to deny the existence of gas chambers. Think about the Ernst Zundel in Canada. Think about Fred Leuchter and his bogus, his trip, it was a real trip, but his bogus claims about there not being gas chambers. You have to ask why this emphasis on gas chambers, because it is the gas chambers that give the Holocaust some of its unique characteristics that you had here. A gun can be used to defend yourself, a gun can be used to procure food, a gun can be used for a variety of purposes, and it can be used for murder as well. But a gas chamber was, as we said in the courtroom, as my solicitor and barrister said, a purpose-built instrument for killing. It had no other purpose but to be used for murder. And therefore, deniers go to great ends to question the existence of gas chambers. So anybody who would say to you, well, yes, I believe Jews were killed, but I don't believe there were gas chambers, that's Holocaust denial. Questioning the survivors, claiming there are no documents, all those things make up the panoply of characteristics of Holocaust denial.
And Deborah, what would you say are the connections between Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism?
I think it's even more, Roni, than connections. Holocaust denial is a form of anti-Semitism. Holocaust denial is not some mistaken notion, some historical, oh, I got my facts wrong, I missed a certain document. The only way of understanding, and I put understanding even in quotation marks, Holocaust denial is by seeing it as a form of anti-Semitism. Deniers, if you were sat, I often use this description of this analogy, and some of you may have heard me say it before. If you were, when the days when we could still fly easily and not be masked up and separated from anyone else in our row or whatever, if you were to sit down on an airplane next to a Holocaust denier and by chance ask the person, you know, what do you do? I'm a historian. Oh, how interesting. What do you write about the Holocaust? And then you say, oh, it was terrible. I don't know much about it, but it was terrible. Obviously, that would be the people on this call. And the person spent the next amount chunk of time giving you all the reasons, bogus, of course, of, you know, there was no Hitler signed paper, there is no this, there is no that, gas chambers would have exploded, all sorts of things that if you have studied the topic, you know are bogus, but you don't know that. The natural thing, the logical thing would be to ask, okay, so if there was no Holocaust, why did the Jews make this claim that there was a Holocaust? Why did they go to such great efforts? What's in it for them? And I put that, of course, in the air.
Listen to the talk.
Will I take that?
What's in it for them to make up this story? And what a denier will answer is something I alluded to or said earlier. What did the Jews get out of the Holocaust? They got two things. One is a state, and I'm saying that because that's the general perception. The existence of the state of Israel is much more complex than just this direct result of the Holocaust. As I often say to people, if it were a direct result of the Holocaust, it would have been established in 45, 46. It doesn't come about really till the end of 47, 48. But that's the general perception, that the state of Israel is a direct outcome of the Holocaust. And what's the other thing that the Jews got out of the Holocaust? Well, reparations, which is, or use whatever word you want, but it's a fancy word for money. And right away, with those two explanations, you've given your interlocutor, you've given your questioner, the person who can't understand why this why this myth was made up by the Jews, an answer that within the context of anti-Semitism makes perfect sense. Let me explain that. If you were to take a template of charges of anti-Semitism, I think there would be 3 or 4 things you would include. One, that the Jew, something to do with money, controlling banks, controlling finances, controlling Wall Street, whatever it might be, but something to do with money, money lending, whatever. Something to do with smarts, but not in an affirmative way, in a malicious, in a deleterious way. Jews are clever. Jews are conniving. Maybe there's some linguist on the call who can tell us whether a hard C, has that negative, but clever, conniving, crafty. In other words, they are smart, but they use their smarts for nefarious purposes. That would be a second element. A third element is what I call punching above their weight. Small in number, but exceptionally powerful, able to control groups even though they are not, you may not know they have a controlling hand, they play this control hand. And the fourth element, and of course, this is the classic, this all grows out of, if you're going in the history of anti-Semitism, again, I'm summarizing greatly here, but the template, of course, is the deicide story, and the way that deicide story was used by the church and for
she's talking already.
For millennia. Fourth, this fits right into, of course, the Christian theology, is the Jew as devil. What is it? Is it Joshua Trachtenberg's classic work on, I think it was his work on the topic. But what is the devil in Christian theology? The devil has two characteristics. One, that the devil is the only one able to harm God. And the second characteristic would be the devil comes and does his handiwork without your knowing, comes in disguise. You don't know you've been manipulated. So if that's the template of anti-Semitism, you've given the, and I know I'm backing forth, but this group is well versed in these things to be able, I hope to be able to follow. When the denier says reparations and estate, you've given an explanation that makes sense. Well, money, Jews were always interested in money. And Jews would not care. Jews don't care about others. They're only interested in their own welfare. So if another people, the denier would say, if another people had to be dispossessed, if they just wanted this land, that's how they behave. And in terms of punching above your weight, because if the Holocaust was a myth, how was it that the Nuremberg laws, yes, it's a fourth clause, et cetera, but have crimes against humanity? How is it that Germany paid these billions of dollars in reparations? How is it that we have had all these commemorations of the Holocaust? How is that possible? Well, the Jews were able to manipulate that. The Jews were able, because they are so smart, conniving, and able to punch above their weight, to force the Allies into convening the Nuremberg trials and making crimes against humanity a part of it. They were able, the Jews were able to force Germany and say to Germany, to blackmail Germany and say to Germany, if you want to be accepted into the family of nations, back into the family of nations, you've got to admit to this, even though you didn't do it. So that it is, I think it's not only does it fit into anti-Semitism, but it is classic anti-Semitism, because the only way to make sense, and of course you're making sense, you can't make sense of anti-Semitism because it's a prejudice, et cetera, it's not logical. But for the person who has been exposed to it, and there's no one in the Western world, and probably beyond the Western world, well beyond the West, who hasn't been exposed to it, here's an explanation that makes sense. If the explanation had been, oh, because Jews are shiftless, they're lazy, they don't work hard, you would say, wait a minute, that's the wrong stereotype. That's a common stereotype, prejudicial stereotype in my country, of course, of Black people. Or if you gave, oh, they're all mafia. Well, that's a, or less so now, but that was a stereotype of Italians in the United States and in other places as well. So you've given them an explanation, oh, I know that about Jews. Oh, well, that makes sense.
So if this is the case, what do we do? How do we fight this?
It should be very easy, because I'm sitting here looking on just on my screen, I see a number of people, Javi and so many others, Boaz, and who you know, the documents are unending. We have the documents. We have the Holocaust, as I like to say, has the dubious distinction of being the best documented genocide in history. Maybe with the Armenian genocide, a close second, and we don't have all the documents of the Armenian genocide, thanks to the Turks. I think we fight it in two ways. Certainly we fight it with documents, with facts. And that's how my case was structured. We didn't, you know, people often say, I had to prove the Holocaust happened. Well, in truth, we didn't prove the Holocaust happened. we did something else, which, and those from Britain, I think will, or certainly if there are any lawyers on, will understand this. We set about to prove that David Irving was a liar. That's why I called my book History on Trial. We followed the footnotes back to the sources, and we had the dream team of historians, Richard Evans, Robert Jan van Pelt, Christopher Browning, I'm blocking Hayo Funke, Peter Longerish. And they divided up Irving's work, and they followed his, on the Holocaust, and followed his footnotes back to the sources. And I would say that in virtually, and probably you could leave out virtually, every case where he cited something about the Holocaust, you found a misstatement, you found a change of date, you found the change of sequence, just changing the sequence of a conversation. There, I have it in the book, there's a exchange between Hitler, Ribbentrop, and Admiral Horthy in April of 1943, and before the Germans had come into Hungary. And what Irving does in that is just change the sequence of the conversation, and it comes out with a whole different ending. It looks like Hitler has said, no, we don't want to kill the Jews. In fact, when the killing was at its height at that point. In fact, in my classes, when I do a seminar on Holocaust denial, one of the early things I do is say to the students, find a newspaper article, magazine article, and don't change the words, but just change the sequence of the events and the sequence of the quotes to make it have a different meaning. They think it's going to be very hard, and they find out it's quite easy. So what we did in the trial was follow the footnotes back to the sources. And there have been not only my book, which came out dealing with the trial, but Richard Evans' line about Hitler, Robert Jan van Pelt's The Case for Auschwitz, Peter Longerish's book as well, the Hitler, I think the Hitler Order or whatever. All those deal with aspects of what was done in the trial. And also there is, by the way, a website that is set up through Emory, but it has its own portal, HGOT, Holocaust Denial on Trial.org, O-R-G. It has its own entrance because the university is afraid that the deniers will try to bring down my site and bring down the whole university as well. But you have all the expert reports there. Read the reports of Richard Evans, of Robert Young, and the others. They are works, they are terrific works of history. So that's one way of doing it. But for that, you have to be a scholar. I sometimes advocate, and this only goes so far, but you certainly can use it, of using logic. Certainly with people who are not historians, who are not steeped in the documents. And first I say, and I did a TED talk in which I made this point right at the outset, for deniers to be right, who would have to be wrong? Well, certainly all the survivors who talk about their experiences would have to be wrong. All the bystanders, whether the people in the towns, whether near Treblinka, near Auschwitz, near the various death camps, who saw trains going in at certain points day after day and coming out empty. The people in the various parts, we had the mobile killings, who saw and who have, we have many documented cases of that. So it would be survivors, bystanders, the thousands of historians, many of whom are on this call, but historians in North America, historians throughout Europe, historians in the Middle East, historians in Japan, historians in South America, historians in Australia, in Africa. All these people who've written about it would all have to be part of the hoax or have been duped. And the other group that would have to be wrong, of course, would be the perpetrators. In not one war crimes trial, I'm saying that that I can think of, and maybe if someone knows otherwise, you can correct me. I'd be happy to have the correction. Have you had a perpetrator, whether it was a German perpetrator or Estonian, whatever, from either from the Reich itself or from those countries that participated? Have you had a perpetrator say it didn't happen? Eichmann. You know, what did he say? He said, you know, I'm not guilty because I had to follow orders. I'm not guilty because I had no choice in the matter. So you haven't had a perpetrator say it didn't happen. So that would be one way, you know, when you say this to a student, it suddenly the light bulbs go off. And I say the deniers, think about the deniers. The deniers have no documents, no witnesses, no narrative, no evidence. They have nothing. So yet they come with this claim. So that would be one way. The other way, and I'll just give, I'll do this quickly. One other example of a logical way of sort of demolishing their arguments. Then one of the arguments deniers make is that the Third Reich, the Germans were so organized and so successful and so accomplished at what they did that they never would have allowed hundreds of thousands of survivors to exist, to testify about what happened. They wouldn't have allowed witnesses. They would have made sure that all those people who could witness something would have disappeared. So a denier would say in their convoluted reasoning, the very fact that there are survivors who make these claims about gas chambers, about death camps, about shootings, proves it didn't happen because they wouldn't exist. The Germans wouldn't have allowed that to happen. So sometimes I will cite that argument for my classes and say, find the fallacy in this argument. And it takes the students maybe 1 or 2 tries, but pretty rapidly, they come up with the fact when you say the Germans were so organized and so adept at what they were doing that they never would have allowed this to happen. Well, what was something else the Germans, sometimes I have to prompt them and say, well, what else did the Germans want to accomplish that they might not have accomplished? And of course, win the war. So what you've got to do is pull apart the logic of their arguments. So it's one with the historical data following the footnotes, and the other just that this is a totally irrational, illogical argument.
Thank you,
I'm going to
Deborah.
add one other thing, Roni.
Sure, please.
So then the natural question that would come out of this, well, if it's so irrational, if it's so illogical, if there is no narrative, if there are no witnesses, if there are no documents, if it makes no sense, you know, for all these other people to have to, how does it gain any traction at all? And that brings us back to anti-Semitism.
And so, you know, your trial was, 2 decades ago? What is the difference between Holocaust denial then and now?
The internet. Certainly the internet. The trial was in the year 2000, and it was, you know, already then you had the internet, but of course it has grown exponentially in the past 20 years. But when I first started to work on the topic of Holocaust denial, when I wrote my first book on this, I wrote 2 books on the book that precipitated the trial and then the book about the trial. If you wanted to find Holocaust denial material, you had to get it in an unmarked envelope, mailed without a return address, etc. Today, all you have to do is go into Google and say, Diary of Anne Frank, a hoax. Or even if you put in the Diary of Anne Frank, and I'm sure someone will be checking me as I say this, into Google, I think sometimes the 4th source that comes up is a Holocaust denial source. So that is one thing that has changed and changed dramatically. The mode of communication, the mode of spreading this hatred, and that makes a great difference. The other thing I think, and we've seen this now in the past 3, 4, 5, 6 years, something like that, Holocaust denial comes from mainly from the right, they're saying it didn't happen. What you get from the political left, and I'm not saying everybody on the right or everybody on the left, but the kind that comes from the political left is more diminution of the Holocaust. I'm so tired of hearing about the Holocaust. There go those Jews again talking about the Holocaust. What, another Holocaust movie? Oh, it's just a way of covering up for Israel's wrongs or whatever. That's what the kind of thing you'll get from on the left end of the political spectrum. On the right end of the political spectrum, you get denial and infatuation with Hitler. Those of you who are familiar with the what happened in Charlottesville about, I guess it's 3 years ago this summer, may know, of course, this was a unite the right. There had never been anything like this. All the different far right-wing groups came together to march there. There's going to be a civil trial starting fairly soon that's being brought by people who were harmed during this march, who were beaten, etc. I'm going to be an expert witness on the issue of anti-Semitism. And just the rhetoric of the organizers at Charlottesville and before Charlottesville was just full of the inherent contradiction that you often find on the far right. It didn't happen, but Hitler was a great man for making it happen. Or it didn't happen, but it should have happened, kind of thing. So as we see the rise, even in Germany, of these far right groups, these extremists on the right, we're seeing a rise of Holocaust denial. It's part of the panoply of their racist, anti-Semitic attitudes.
Thank you, Deborah. I would like to conclude my part of this conversation, and I can see in the chat that we have many questions from the audience, with a question on the subject of analogies. As you know, I wrote extensively on Holocaust memory in apartheid South Africa, and we have many South Africans here with us in the audience. In 1976, part of the notorious booklet, Did 6 Million Really Die? The Truth at Last, written by the British Holocaust denier Richard Verrall, appeared in South African newspapers in English and Afrikaans. And the South African Jewish Board of Deputies ran a very impressive struggle against the publication of this booklet using judicial means. It appealed to the apartheid censorship system, arguing that the booklet was an undesirable material due to the fact that it was offensive and harmful to the public moral. But while the board aimed at defining Holocaust denial as a national threat, the appointed committee that inspected the booklet decided to ban the booklet on a different ground, arguing that it had no historical or scientific value, contained falsehoods, and was deeply insulting for sections of the population. Of course, they meant the Jewish community. And this decision marked the acceptance of the Holocaust, and I'm talking of 1976, as a crucial part of the Jewish collective identity. It also exemplified the perception of Jews under apartheid laws as a separate yet privileged ethnic, religious, and cultural group that must be protected through racial segregation. And it was a clear case of which, through official national channels, the Jewish community publicly mediated the anti-Semitic message of the Holocaust to the local white communities as distinct from and completely relevant to local racism. Moreover, whenever connections between anti-Semitism and apartheid's racism, Nazism and the apartheid regime, or Jewish suffering during the Holocaust versus the Black suffering under apartheid were drawn by activists, Jews and non-Jews. The community institutions saw it as an act of contempt, distortion of history, and even Holocaust denial. And this position slightly changed during the period of transition from apartheid to democracy, when the exhibition Anne Frank in the World arrived in South Africa. And we have here Myra Oswin, who was the one who brought the exhibition to South Africa, and in 1999 actually established the first Holocaust Center in South Africa. And this exhibition marked actually the first official national effort to legitimize analogical connections between apartheid and the Holocaust. However, this issue, as we know, is the issue of analogies, is still very sensitive for Jews and non-Jewish constituencies. Not only in South Africa, we know it from Germany and from the US. In June 2019, we had Democrat Representative Alexandra Cortez describing the migrant detention facilities in southern of the US border as concentration camps, and she was rejected. Of course, she was attacked by Yad Vashem and by the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I know that a while back, and I know that you have changed your thinking about this issue ever since, but a while back you did wrote about such analogies as a minor Holocaust denial. And I wanted you to address this issue because I feel that by addressing such analogies as anti-Semitic or even Holocaust denial manifestations, we are the ones that creating a distortion by minimizing the acts of actual deniers. So this is my last question.
It's a long question, and you are absolutely right. I have changed my views. I think one also has to look at the context within which historians were working. And I think when the first spurt of interest, I mean, of course, it starts right after the war, and you have so many important books written in the 50s and more into the 60s. But in the 70s, you get this great growth of interest in it. And by the way, I saw that booklet not long after it appeared. Yehuda Bauer was visiting the University of Washington, which I was then teaching, and he showed me the booklet, and I looked at it and I laughed. I said, this is ridiculous. Who would believe such a thing? So I was wrong there too, to laugh, because of course it changed my life quite dramatically. But I used to say that these analogies are wrong because it's a soft core denial. I was wrong to say that. First of all, it was almost a reaction that finally we're looking at the Holocaust, and now people refuse to look at it separately, but always want to put it together with other tragedies. And that often happens, by the way, with anti-Semitism. That, let me just for a moment, then I'll come back to this analogy question. About a year ago, maybe a little over that, there was a resolution introduced into the House of Representatives by Speaker Nancy Pelosi at a time when a couple of members of Congress were making some pretty overtly anti-Semitic comments. And she introduced a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. It wouldn't be a law, it was a resolution. I happened to be in Washington at the time. I was up on the Hill, and I was asked to meet with a number of members of Congress and with staffers because there was a pushback against this bill from the liberal end of the spectrum, saying, well, no, we shouldn't just condemn anti-Semitism. We should also condemn racism, homophobia, etc. And what I argued, I said, I'm not diminishing in any way racism, I'm not diminishing homophobia, but right now the problem is anti-Semitism. And it was like many people, the criticism was coming from people from the more left liberal, left of center point of view, that you shouldn't, and often many of them Jews, no, you should never talk about anti-Semitism, you always have to talk about all these other things. Just like today, when many people in the Jewish community say, well, why are we talking about Black Lives Matter, all lives matter? Yes, but right now the problem is in the United States with Blacks being, people who are Black being attacked, shot, etc. So there are times to focus on one and there are times to focus on others. Going back to the analogy question, you know, and I'm sort of embarrassed that I took that point of view, but I'm more than willing to say I was wrong. There's so many historians and very fine historians on this call. We do our work by analogizing. Is this worse? Is this better? Is this the same? Is it different? Is this leader different from? Is this leader the same as? You know, is this action, et cetera, et cetera. So analogies are helpful. I don't know who's on. You mentioned some of I didn't catch who was on from South Africa, but I think it was in the Cape Town Holocaust Memorial, before they built the beautiful museum in the small, there was a small, if I'm remembering correctly, a small display area, I don't know, a room size or something. And if I remember correctly, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, that there were two pictures that were side by side. The famous picture of a Nazi doctor or German doctor with a caliper measuring the little girl's nose to see if it was a Jewish nose. And that picture, of course, is in many Holocaust museums, including Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And next to it was a picture of a little girl on a chair with a pencil through her head. And that was the depiction of the pencil test. And a man standing next to her put the pencil there, whether he was in a white jacket or not, I don't remember. But the pencil test, of course, was this absurd test that was created by the South African apartheid regime. If they couldn't determine whether you were colored or because black colored white, you were colored or white, they put a pencil through your head. If it stayed in, obviously you were colored because you had kinky hair, and if it fell out, you were white. And on this basis, children were taken away from parents, etc. And I asked whoever was taking me through, and I don't remember who it was, but I know there are a couple people here from South Africa, and they'll probably identify yourself, remind me. I said, what were you thinking when you put these two up? And the answer, I think it was a very viable answer, was, look, apartheid and the Holocaust are different. The white South Africans, the apartheid regime was not looking to murder and have a complete genocide of all the black South Africans because they needed them. They needed them to mine the gold. They needed them to clean their kids' diapers. They needed them to cook the food. They needed them to clean their houses, etc. They needed them to make them wealthy. But if many died, if thousands died or were killed in the course of that, so be it. So you can analogize certain things, and you certainly can analogize the absurd caliper test with the absurd pencil test. You always can make analogies. The question is how far you take it and how far you go. I think the Holocaust has unique elements. Certainly has unique elements, certainly in terms of the gas chamber, certainly in terms of a continent-wide effort, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender, irrespective of whether the person posed a threat. There are many unique elements to it. I don't have to belabor the point with this kind of audience. But there are things that can be analogized. That's how we do history. And I guess we're Erev Yom Kippur, Et Chata'ai Ani Maskir Hayom, my sins I do acknowledge today, that to say there are no analogies was simply stupid. I can say that about myself. So,
Deborah, thank you so much for these fascinating insights and for the conversation. And I'll clear the floor. I'll put the mic back to Daniela and Jan, who will manage the discussion.
That's right. Thanks very much, Professor Lipstadt, for all these insights and your stimulating discussion with Roni. My name is Jan. I'm the William Ekman Fellow for Holocaust Studies at Harvard University, and I'm the first one to ask all the many questions we have in the chat. The first question comes from South Africa, from Linda Hackner, and she asks, do you believe that Holocaust distortion is a more subtle way of denial? Do you see it as the same thing? And she's specifically interested in how Poland and or Ukraine are revising currently this type of history.
Yes, I do think right now it's much more common. We see it in Poland. Again, bringing Coles to Newcastle to this group I don't have to fully explain the Poland issue, but whether you talk to Jan Gross or Jan Grabowski or many of the Polish historians working on this, the attempt to rewrite Polish history and we were only victims, we were not perpetrators, that is what I call, I use the term softcore Holocaust denial. I use hardcore and softcore, and as many of you I'm sure know, hardcore and softcore are usually terms that are related to pornography. And I think that the softcore denial is a form of, is a pornographic form of history, but absolutely. Or in Hungary, you see it in Hungary, you know, with the memorial and the rewriting Admiral Horthy and the House of Terror and all those kind of things. That is, it's a much more subtle form of Holocaust denial, and Jan, exactly as the question stated, a much more dangerous one. Because, and to use a non-academic term, it's squishier. You know, it's hard to pin down and say, no, we have a document to say that on this day, in this place, on the Russian front, on the Soviet front, there was this murder and we have these witnesses, but it's much harder. And yes, I think it is very, very disturbing. Because when you push back against it, you Jews don't want to share, you Jews only want to talk about you, et cetera, that kind of thing.
Thank you so much. And we have a question from Professor Javi Dreyfus. She's asking, there is currently a heated debate about the very definition of anti-Semitism. I know you wrote quite a bit about it, and maybe you can say a few words about it.
If Javi's there, I would wonder, you know, there are many debates, so I'm not sure which debate she is talking about explicitly. Can we get Javi to weigh in?
Hi, Deborah. I didn't want to interfere you. It could be what's going on with IRA, what's going on in the German politics, as well as in Engel's writings about anti-Semitism. And as you said, it's not anti-Semitism, but one word. And just if you could refer to that, because I know you wrote so much about it and deal so much with it. Sorry.
There's a great debate. Part of the debate also, whether directly or indirectly, often refers to Israel. You know, if you criticize Israeli policies, is that anti-Semitic, et cetera? Of course it's not, because if you want a criticism, as I tell people outside of Israel, if you want to read criticism of Israeli policies, read Haaretz, or go to the Knesset, you know, where people are, you have to be very good in Hebrew because it's fast and it's furious, but you'll hear lots of criticisms of policies. I think that certainly in the United States, there are many Jews who are hypersensitive to any sort of criticism. And I think far too quick to immediately fall into the response of, oh, that's anti-Semitic. There's a Talmudic saying, many of you on this call will know it, Tafasta merubelo tafasta. If you try to grab too much, you grab nothing at all. I think one of the dangers is if you call every time there's a criticism, you say, oh, that's anti-Semitic, when it's like this Chicken Little, the sky is falling. When you're talking about real anti-Semitism, it says, oh, every time someone says something negative about Jews, you think that's anti-Semitic. It's very disturbing to me to see the way this has been politicized. And I think it is something that we have not seen the end of, and is going to continue. But it's certainly, by and large, whether directly or indirectly, this kind of debate has as its underlying motif the question of Israel and criticism of Israel, etc. You know, is being anti-Zionist, being anti-Semitic. I happen to think it is, others don't, but certainly it's closely linked. Does that speak to what you were saying, asking, Javi?
Sure, thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have a question related to what one could call the electronic age, social media, something you've talked quite a bit about in your previous talks as well, about the proliferation of conspiracy theories on the internet and the impact that this has on Holocaust denial. What do you see for its future, and what directions do you think we as scholars could go in?
You know, Jan, if I had been asked that question even 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said, I'm not going to be able to get it. I'm not that worried. But currently I am, because first of all, generally stepping back from the question of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, we're seeing a proliferation of conspiracy theories in QAnon and others. QAnon being having as its not so subtle foundational element anti-Semitism. But the acceptance of conspiracy theories, and it doesn't help when you have heads of state who further those conspiracy theories, build on them, plan on, elaborate on them. It's very hard to fight. And a conspiracy theory is self-enclosed. You can't fight it. You know, there are people who will still tell you that there was no landing on the moon. That the landing on the moon, I make this point in my book, the landing on the moon was really on a stage set in Nevada, Utah, wherever they put it. And if you were to go to them and say, look, I have here rocks that the astronauts brought back, and on every place on Earth, you will not find the same composition, chemical and physical composition of these rocks. They are absolutely unique, uniquely unique. You know, unique can't be modified, but these are uniquely unique. So, of course, where did they come from? And the person who thinks that the moon landing was a hoax will say to you, well, where did you get that rocks? And you say with great seriousness, I got them from NASA, from the, the American entity in charge of space exploration. And they would say, well, of course, NASA's part of the problem. What are you telling me? You know, this is, so conspiracy theory is a self-contained, self-fulfilling kind of thing. And we live in an age today of conspiracy theories, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's now the thing going about is that the fires in the western part of the United States were started by Antifa group, anti-fascist groups. Even the FBI in today's setting of the FBI, which has become highly politicized, has said there is no truth to that. That has not stopped those rumors from flying. So Holocaust denial, when you tie it in with anti-Semitism, this is a very potentially fruitful period for it, sadly.
Thank you so much. And we have another question from Stacy Gallin. She's asking, what do you think about the relationships between anti-Semitism and nationalism, not only in the US, but also in European countries?
And between anti-Semitism and nationalism?
Yes, yes.
You know, look, nationalism in and of itself is not a bad thing, you know, to have a strong feeling about your country, etc. But I think the nationalism she's talking about is when it gets to be a sort of isolationist kind of thing, at least in this country, isolationist, my country, only my country. What we're seeing today is the further right you go on the spectrum, in terms of nationalism, when you get to extremist groups, you're going to find it's an anti-Semitic element. I read thousands of pages of documents and exchanges in preparation for writing my report for the court for the Charlottesville case, and it just is all over the place. And it's extremely disturbing. And of course, I'm talking to you from Atlanta, which is in the South, though some people like to say Atlanta is a city surrounded on 4 sides by Georgia, or the further north you go out of Atlanta, the more in the deep South you are. But still, I'm in the South, and there is not just here, but there's a never-ending debate with how do you deal with history, how do you deal with the past. you have to ask yourself, why were there Confederate flags at Charlottesville? Why, when you go to these extreme far right kind of things, do you see Confederate flags? What's going on here? And this, the notion that if you look at anything that your country did wrong, you are not a patriot, you are not a nationalist. That's all tied up. And Jews are very critical, we are self-critical, but that it invariably intersects with anti-Semitism, whether, and not logically, but it intersects.
Another question we have, and this really ties well to what you just said. This is something that we also did last month with Javi. On a more personal note, precisely because of the overwhelming evidence that this phenomena really are rising again. And these, you said it's really disturbing. What does it do to us as scholars? And this is a question of Patrick Gilner, who asks, how do we keep from despairing when it seems like untruth and distortions of history are almost overwhelming and relentless? How do we keep up with it? And what does it do to us as scholars? And how would you describe your trajectory on this more personal level?
I am what's called a public scholar. Many of us on this call are. I write op-eds, I give lectures, whether in 2 dimensions or sometimes used to be in 3 dimensions, now it's just in 2 dimensions. It's very disturbing. It can be very disheartening because so many of the people on this call, and we have a wide age spectrum, remember when a meeting of Holocaust historians could take place in a small room on a, and now of course it is such a different story, and the extent of the scholarship, the fine scholarship that's already out and continuing, and the young scholars that I saw in Washington, or the younger scholars I saw in Washington this past year, it's an impressive thing, and you can really, I don't know, you rejoice, but you can feel a sense of satisfaction. But when you see this skepticism, when you see this willingness to discard facts, when you see the attacks, and certainly coming from the leadership in my country, attacks on courts, attacks on the media, attacks on facts, that's all a breeding ground for anti-Semitism. So personally, it can be pretty disheartening. I think historians in this field and people who are willing to enter the fray of the public conversation, whether it's about denial, whether it's about anti-Semitism, you have to be very careful. It's tough, and we can all slip up. Because I think that on one hand, we think the gentlewoman doth protest too much. You can overstate a case and you lose it's very hard to remain nuanced. And I think nuance is an extremely important aspect of this. On a personal level, it can be disheartening. And that's why I'm glad, even if, as I say, it's only 2-dimensional, to be with so many people who care about this topic. But it can be, you sort of look back and you say, wait a minute, are we still fighting that battle again? But I was asked a question about a year and a half ago when my book came out in England, in the British edition. And I was at, Hay on Wye, the wonderful book festival in Wales, in England. I think it's one of the largest book festivals. And I was speaking there to an audience of 400, 500 people, most of them not Jews. These were book festival people who happened to travel there. And I only say that because I could tell from the questions. And my interlocutor was an editor of a former editor, now retired, of a major British daily, herself not Jewish. And we had spent some time before together talking, and then done a long interview. And her final question to me was, this is such a depressing topic, and the issue of anti-Semitism is such a real topic. And yet, to me, you seem like a very optimistic person. How do you manage to do that on a personal level? And I told her that that morning I had been in Bath in the city of Bath. And I had gone to see the excavations of the Roman baths, which are the National Trust in Britain have, as they do with so many things, have set up so beautifully. You really got a sense of what the baths were like. And as you walked through, I said, my God, this is like a very high-class health club. There was a steam bath, and there was a cold bath, and there's a massage room, and there's a little gym, et cetera. And then you got to the part of the excavation of the altar to the gods, because, of course, to the ancient Romans, these warm baths were a gift of the gods. And I said, that would have been problematic. If I were here at that time and I were a Jew, I would say, forget the Jewish stuff. I want to be part of the group that goes to the baths. And the reason I told that anecdote, I said, is that there's no, and now I'm speaking not as a historian, but simply from the heart, there's no logical reason why the Jewish people should be around today. If you look at Jewish history, and there are more years of people who study Jewish history on this call than I've been with in a very long time. If you look at Jewish history and you approach it logically, told of the different times of there still are Jews, that we are still here, makes no historical sense. So for all of those who feel like, my God, I've been fighting this battle for so many years, I've been writing about this and working on this, and now it only seems worse than ever, I think you've got to accept the fact that we're here, and that makes no sense, and use that as a source of chizuk, of strength, And I'm speaking very personally, which I don't usually do, certainly not with other historians. So.
Well, thanks very much for these insights and these words of comfort as well.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question, and it's coming from Desiree Gill from Boston. She's asking, I am very concerned with the term fake news as used all too much today in the US. It feels too much like the early rise of Hitler and Nazism. Would you care to say what you think about it?
I think we're seeing some very disturbing signs. And earlier, I think Roni asked me about analogies. I'm very careful with analogies. And people say, people, especially those more to the left, who are, or even not, irrespective of their political stance, who are very critical of the leadership of my country, say, is this a harbinger of Nazi Germany? And is this 1938? I say, no, it's definitely not 1938, but it might be October 32, or maybe even January 15th, 33, January 29th, 33. In the sense of when you begin to attack the viability and the legitimacy of democratic institutions, the institutions that are the pillars of a democracy, the media, the courts, elected officials, and you say, just politicians. We had someone, President, question Ruth Bader Ginsburg's last wish, which she gave to her granddaughter, a Harvard-trained lawyer and a very respected person, and the first reaction, not that she has the power to decide who should replace her or when the replacement should be, that must have been written by a Democratic politician, the president said. When you begin to immediately, knee-jerk reaction is to question. The knee-jerk, not just question, because we all question, that's our business, that's what we do, but to dismiss inconvenient truths. I mean, maybe we close by going back to where we began. The Holocaust is an inconvenient truth. Why did they spend so much time denying the Holocaust? Because the Holocaust maybe creates sympathy for Jews. Maybe it proves that what Jews have been saying about anti-Semitism is wrong. It's an inconvenient truth. So I can analogize, I can say, yes, the British bombed London, but the Brits bombed Berlin. Or yes, or I can say, yes, the Germans had concentration camps, but America had camps for, not for Japanese people, often say that, but over 50% of those people in those camps were American citizens of Japanese descent, which I think is a very important distinction. But you can do so many analogies if you're trying to sort of defend the record of Nazi Germany, but there's no analogy to the gas chamber. There's no analogy to the genocide. So what do? You dismiss it. Inconvenient truths. And the minute you start doing that, the minute you start and going back to what I said earlier, the minute that you start attacking the integrity of the courts, the integrity of all politicians, the integrity of scientists, the integrity of experts. I remember during the Brexit debate, that one of the leading supporters of Brexit in England, who's now I think in the cabinet, in the government, when he was being questioned, I believe it was by the BBC, and the questioner started his question by saying, experts say that if there is Brexit, and his response was, the British people have heard enough from experts. We're tired from hearing from experts. That kind of anti-intellectual, anti-expertise, and coupled with the anti-democratic attitudes of criticizing of music, the media, et cetera, is very dangerous. And it is a breeding ground for conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theories are a breeding ground for anti-Semitism. So, I guess we just have to continue to fight the good fight. It gets more and more depressing in this country right now. I am in a complete funk. I am doing lots of crossword puzzles and spelling bee and other kind of things because I who usually read 2 or 3 newspapers a day, I just can't stand it. I see Jan shaking his head, agreeing. But I think we have to continue to fight it. So I'd be careful with the analogies, but there are warning signs. I think Tim Snyder has written a lot about this, as have others. But to be careful, not to go too far, because but to do it in a matun, how would you say it, in a restrained fashion, I think is exceptionally important. But what's the definition of a Jewish telegram? Start worrying, details follow. We're getting too many details now, and worrying, I think, though Jews have raised worrying to fine art, it's appropriate now.
Thank you so much. And we have another question from a Holocaust survivor who actually knows you, Roman Kent.
I saw it, Roman.
Can you maybe unmute yourself and ask the question directly? I think we are all really hoping to hear him.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly, Roman.
Okay, Deborah, first of all, I want to say and make the remarks how we met, which goes years and years ago. I heard you lecturing in New York. I was involved there with the organization which negotiated with Germany the so-called money, which my remarks about the money which we get from Germany, which is really substantial amount of money because it goes to more than $1 billion a year. And I started the negotiation. We got nothing from them. And I said to you, Deborah, we had one thing in common. You are the teacher of history in Emory University, and I was a student in Emory University. And I remember you told me, no, I don't believe you. So next time you were lecturing in New York, I brought you a, what do you call it? From Emory University, my diploma, whatever it is. So you notice, oh, you had a different name, you were a very good student. I said, that's besides the point. But the point is that we know each other, and Emory University is something which is a link between us. Then by coincidence, a few years ago, I was talking at the university close to the city which you mentioned, where they had the meeting, and they asked me a question after I finished talking. They asked me a question, Mr. Kemp, how would you answer it right now, the people that want to protest in Charlottesville? So I say, I don't want to give them advice, but I can tell you only what I did when we had a meeting of survivors, the first meeting of survivors in Washington. And we had 20,000 survivors. When the police came to me and told me that we understand that there is a group of Germans, they want to boycott your meeting. And I thought for a moment, and I told them, I tell you what, I don't know what you can tell them, what advice you can give them, but just tell them that we are here, 20,000 survivors, and let them come. No, they most probably did this because the German that wanted to boycott our meeting did not show up. So tells you that the power is something that they understand.
No, I think that is very true. I think you're making a very important point. I've been reading a lot about the history of the Yishuv. I was just reading about the Evian conference and the fact that Golda Meir and the others from the Yishuv who were at the Evian conference in June of '39 sat in the observer section without the right to speak. Golda Meir after that gave a very powerful press conference, but I can't imagine what it was like to sit in that very ornate room in Evian, listening to the fate of your people being debated, and you couldn't even stand up and say anything. So if you want to talk about the emergence from powerlessness, I think that's a prime example. Roman, I don't want to correct you. Just on a small thing. When the first time I met you and you told me you had gone to Emory, I didn't say I don't believe you. I said I can't believe you. I can't believe that that's true. And I say that in the light, some of you know this story, when Justice Frankfurter was given the news of what was going on in Poland with the death camps by Jan Karski. He said to him, I can't believe you. And according to Jan Karski said, are you calling me a liar? He said, no, I didn't say I don't believe you. I said, I can't believe you. It boggled the mind. It boggled my mind to think that you, a survivor of the Holocaust, fresh off the boat coming to America, you found a educational home here at Emory University, a university then very much in the South. But I never would say I don't believe you. And yes, it is true. And Emory is very proud of that. And so I thank you for your comments. But power used judiciously can be a good thing, with an emphasis on used judiciously. And I think much of what we study goes back to that. Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. We have to conclude now. We have to go and teach. So we are now concluding. First of all, thank you for coming and speaking with us. I remember that we did meet, you did see Western Galilee College. You are one of the few speakers who also was there, but we hope to see you here again. I want to say two things. One, there is a spirit of international cooperation that is fueling what we are doing here. And as we understand that Corona, the COVID-19 is not going away yet, we'll have to develop together new ideas and new ways to work together and do new things together and think of new ideas. And we are really open in Western Galilee. We are really open to hear of your ideas and how we can do across continents, meetings across continents of all of us. And I would also like to tell you that in this spirit, we already can tell you that I'm sharing my screen, just a minute. That we are we already know what our new program is. It will be on a Tuesday, October 20. The same times, like always, we'll send out notices. We couldn't do it as yet. And we will have 3 young Polish scholars that wrote really fascinating books now. And we are inviting all of you to register and attend. We also can tell you that our November program will talk about the Holocaust, I'll say it in short, Holocaust memory in post-colonial states, or in places that have some sort of colonial history. And that will be our next November program. And we are open to new ideas and everything, and also cooperations which are not only in the public, but also between scholars, meetings of scholars. So thank you all. Thank you, Deborah. Shana Tova to all. Gmar Chatima Tova. Happy New Year. We hope to see you all healthy and happy soon. Goodbye.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Thank you all.
Thank you, Deborah.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Ktiva v'chatima tova.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Thank you. Shana Tova.